Okay, today in our Abraham reading, we're going to jump out of Genesis and into Galatians. Now, this is in the New Testament, and this is after Jesus had come as the fulfillment of everything that God had promised through Abraham. In fact, remember in Genesis 12, when God said to Abraham that all nations on the earth would be blessed through Abraham? Well, he was talking about Jesus, that Jesus would come, he would die on the cross, he would raise from the dead, and then the Holy Spirit would come, and that would be the blessing that we would all have through Abraham's seed. And so Paul, an apostle, not from men nor through man, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father, Paul was sent with this message. Paul was given this message to preach this message. And so the church in the region of Galatia, that's who he wrote this letter to, they would hear this message because they were being tempted to leave this simple, basic message, the message that we're saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. And they were going to ditch that in favor of some other kind of message that wasn't really biblical, that wasn't really from Jesus. And so Paul says, I'm astonished that you're so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. Now that there is another gospel. But he says, there are some who trouble you and who want to distort the gospel of Christ. So apparently there was a group that was coming into the churches in Galatia and was trying to get them to understand it differently, or they were trying to sort of diminish the role of Jesus and what Jesus did on the cross. But look what he says there in verse 8. But even if we are an angel from heaven, should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preached, let him be accursed. Now, as you read this, and I encourage you to read this even a couple of times, I want you to notice just how the story of Paul almost parallels the story of Abraham. He says, for I would have you know, brothers, that the gospel that was preached by me is not man's gospel. And he goes on and he explains how Paul received it. Now remember, Paul was a legalistic Jewish Pharisee, right? And then Paul met Jesus, right? A lot like how Abraham met God. Abraham didn't deserve it. It wasn't from anything that Abraham did. God in his grace revealed himself to Abraham. And in the same way, God in his grace revealed himself to Paul. And so he says, but when he who had set me apart before I was born and who called me by his grace was pleased to reveal his son, Jesus, to me, in order that I might preach him among the Gentiles, he says, I didn't immediately consult with anyone. Again, you can read the rest of his story. But in essence, what Paul is saying here in Galatians chapter 1 is, hey, listen, I believed a different understanding. I thought that we could become righteous through our own works as Jewish people, and Paul was striving to do that. And then he said, and then I met Jesus and realized that I was wrong. And this really ties in to the whole story of Abraham. And we'll see that as we continue to read Galatians. But for now, I want you to read Galatians chapter 1. Take some notes on it, journal on it. Maybe even talk with a small group or a mentor about it. And then we're going to continue to unpack the book of Galatians with Abraham in mind.